Hello, and thank you for joining me for day 25 of our Bible study. We are beginning in chapter 14 of Matthew. It starts off with the death of John the Baptist. It talks about Herod the Tetrarch. So we're going back to King Herod, where he was trying to kill Jesus way back at the beginning of the book. Here he is again. Hears reports about Jesus and says to his servants that it's John the Baptist reincarnated, raised from the dead. And because of that, this is why there's miracles being done by him. And then it gives backstory where Herod had already arrested John and put him in prison. And the reason that he did that was because John basically called him out and told him that it wasn't lawful for him to have his brother's wife, which is a law explicitly forbidden. I believe it's inside Leviticus. It's part of those 613 laws, and I think the reason is given as if you take your brother's wife while he's still alive, I guess, you're uncovering his nakedness. And the exception to the rule is if your brother died, then you're expected to take his wife because, one, he's dead, but also because it's, especially in that day and age where there wasn't as much rights for women, it was considered like a helpful blessing to the woman. She didn't have to worry about fending for herself. So it was like an honorable thing. But because of that, Herod had put John into prison and wanted to kill John, but was afraid of the crowd because they thought he was a prophet. It even says they accepted him as a prophet. But on Herod's birthday, the daughter of his brother's wife, so his stepdaughter, it sounds like, or it looks like, danced before them and pleased Herod. And this must have been some dance because it pleased him so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. And I think in a different gospel, it even says up to the half of his kingdom. He promised her that. So I don't know how innocent this dance was, but in any rate, she answered because she had been instructed by her mother. So Herod's now wife, but previously the wife of his brother, has secretly instructed his stepdaughter to ask for the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And it grieved the king because of his oath that he just made to her, and also the dinner guests around him. He still commanded John to be beheaded, even though he was a bit afraid of the people because they accepted him as a prophet and their potential rebellion. So John gets beheaded and his head gets brought on a platter and given to this girl that had been dancing, and she brings it to her mother, Herod's now wife, and the disciples of John took his body and buried it and went and told Jesus. And that's all it says on that. But continuing on, it goes into more miracles. Well, before I go on to that, that's kind of a crazy story, isn't it? The way that John actually comes to his death after being imprisoned, he goes towards being beheaded by the corrupted, premeditated request given by a mother of the king's brother, but now the king's wife, to a stepdaughter who, I don't know what kind of dance this is, but if it's seductive, that would be even more messed up. But clearly Herod's not too shy about that because he's already going to take his brother's wife. How messed up is that for a way to be conspired against and murdered? But at any rate, it moves on to the feeding of the 5,000, a super classic miracle where Jesus is followed by this big crowd, and the disciples are actually saying it's an isolated place, the hour's late, send the crowds away that they can go buy food for themselves. And Jesus said they don't need to go, you give them something to eat. And they said, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish for 5,000 men, not including women and children. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Bring them here to me, he replies. Instructs the crowds to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves, 2 fish. Looking up to heaven, Jesus, he gives thanks and breaks the loaves, gave them to disciples who turned and gave them to the crowds. They all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up of the broken pieces left over 12 baskets full. So when you think about that from the standpoint of perhaps like a skeptic who might be saying that this is just nothing more than everybody honorably took a very small bit and claimed that they were satisfied, they didn't even start with enough to fill 12 baskets full. And it doesn't say that they were honorably taking less than what would satisfy them and then lying about it. It says they were all satisfied. And it also says there were 5,000 men who ate, not counting women and children. And so God made that miracle continue and continue. And even in consuming what little they had, God provided for them a lot more. And that's probably a lot of correlation in that into your life, where if you give what you have for God's sake, he can multiply and give it right back to you. Even in the midst of it being consumed, you can get back more. He can take what you're willing to give to him and multiply it without you even realizing it. The next miracle is a really, really huge classic one, and it's Jesus walking on the water. And so after this, after this previous miracle of the five loaves and 2 fishes, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side. Immediately, he's sending them away. He's making them do this. And I can't help but think that Jesus already knows what's about to happen and is doing it on purpose to teach them. And so he makes them get into the boat and go ahead of him on the other side, while he, Jesus, dispersed the crowds and sends them away. And after he sent the crowds away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. He goes and gets alone with God. He goes and gets alone with his heavenly Father. When evening came, he was there alone. He still hadn't gone out to his disciples when evening came. Meanwhile, the boat was already far from land and was taking a beating from the waves because the wind was against it. So here we go again, just like the previous story where Jesus is asleep in the boat. Here the boat is also taking a bunch of beating from the waves. And something I never noticed before is verse 25. Sorry, this thing is not very high resolution. I think it's verse 25. As the night was ending, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. And the key phrase that was new to me is as the night was ending. So that to me paints a different picture that I hadn't seen before, which was that the disciples were in the boat away from Jesus. Jesus had told them, made them go out onto this open water alone without him. And we're in the midst of all these trials and tempestuous seas, just like beating on them and freaking them out. They're going through a rough time, and Jesus made them go out there to go through the rough time. And as the night was ending, after toiling all that night with all those problems that they had and all those things scaring them throughout the whole night and the morning coming, Jesus came to them walking on the sea. Walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. They just went through all this mess all night long and fighting the storm all night long, and then they see this thing walking on the water, and they're terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and cried out with fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, "Have courage, it is I, do not be afraid." And something that's coming to me just right now is Jesus' advice in the midst of how much horrible struggle that they're going through. His advice is have courage. It is I, do not be afraid. And Peter says to him, Peter here being the one that has the most courage, I would argue, says to him, "Lord, if it is you, order me to come down to you on the water. Order me." So Jesus says, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. he had the most courage and seems like he had the most faith, and he starts walking on the water towards Jesus. And then here's the big thing. When Peter saw the strong wind, he became afraid. I think in another place it says, like the strong wind and the waves around him, he began to become afraid. And he started to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him, saying, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And here Peter is the one that arguably had the most faith out of all of them. And Jesus still says, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And so it's interesting to me that Jesus, there's a lot of things interesting to me about this story, but Jesus calling them to have courage. And for the one that had more courage than the rest, it seems, Jesus still says, "You have little faith. You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" Yeah. I mean, the key thing here is there's a potential based on this, I would say, of God purposefully allowing us to not hear his voice, to go through spells of dry times where we're not hearing from him, where we don't feel like we're close to him, yet we're seeking to be faithful. And the call during those times, during those valleys, during those droughts, is to have courage and not to be afraid, and to keep having faith. And then, in the midst of when you're in those trials and temptations, and you start trying to walk toward God and move toward God, if you get afraid of the things around you, you'll begin to sink and you won't be able to make the forward progress. So the call is to not doubt, but continue to choose faith and courage in the midst of whatever trial your life is sending towards you. A lot of people say keep your eyes on Jesus, and that's another way of thinking about it. Don't be distracted by the trials and all the things that happen in your life that are getting in your way. Just keep your eyes on Jesus and keep having faith and courage in him. Be courageous enough to continue in having faith in him. It says when they got up into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Yeah. That would have been such an amazing, amazing sight to see, position to be in. After they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. When the people there recognized him, they sent word into all the surrounding area, and they brought all their sick to him. They begged him if they could only touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. According to their faith, it was for them. It seems like this chapter gives a big call towards being courageous enough to continue in faith and continue pressing forward in faith in the midst of all the trials that life is bringing. And I think that's a call towards me as much as it may be to you. In the midst of the trials that are in my life and in your life, I want to encourage us to continue having faith. Appreciate you watching. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, comment. It helps the channel out and helps me out, knowing and interacting with people that are appreciating the content or having any input at all. Again, thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.